I recently witnessed a scene in a high-tech German engineering firm. It it felt less like a workplace and more like a study in irony. A complex production line had just ground to a halt. The junior team, bright, young, academically decorated, they were in a state of frantic digital paralysis.
Glued to their screens, I imagine?
Completely. They were glued to their tablets, running diagnostics, scrolling through error codes, and consulting AI troubleshooters. The air was just thick with this panic of theory meeting reality.
Right. And then what happened?
Then a man in his late 50s walked over. He didn't look at a screen. He didn't check a manual.
You just use your senses.
He simply listened to the hum of the machinery, placed his hand on a casing to feel the vibration, and turned a single valve 90 degrees. And just like that,
The system roared back to life.
instantly, the young team was stunned. They saw it as almost like a magic trick, not a technical skill. It was that kind of tacit knowledge, orientation through doing that takes decades to acquire. But here is where the story takes a dark and frankly absurd turn. Later that same afternoon, I spoke with HR at that very same company.
Oh, this is going to be good.
They were lamenting the catastrophic shortage of skilled workers, complaining that they couldn't find anyone with deep technical expertise.
While the guy who just saved them is standing right there.
Right there. And on the desk sat a stack of applications from candidates with the exact same profile as that man rejected instantly. Not because of competence, but because of a single number: their birth year.
Wow.
It was such a jarring contradiction. In the machine room, experience was the only thing that worked. But in the boardroom, experience was treated like an expiration date. It just forces you to ask, why is a country that is physically shrinking and screaming for talent simultaneously throwing its most valuable asset, the people who actually know how the WAD works, onto the scrap heap?
That narrative, it feels almost too perfect in its irony, but it captures the absolute core of the structural problem that a lot of modern economies are facing, particularly in Europe.
It really does.
So our mission today is to really move past that anecdote and analyze the hard economic repercussions of that exact contradiction. We're going to be doing a deep dive into three interconnected areas.
Okay, where do we start?
First, we need to establish just how pervasive age discrimination is in European hiring. The data is, well, it's pretty shocking, and we need to get our heads around the bias mechanism at play.
The why behind it.
Exactly. Second, we'll investigate the corporate and societal implications of this loss. So, how relying on purely digital tools devalues that crucial experience-based tacit knowledge and leads to this critical knowledge gap that nobody wants to talk about.
And finally,
we pivot to the solutions. We'll examine some successful policy frameworks and corporate strategies inspired by international models to actually foster these intergenerational workforces and combat these really severe skilled labor shortages.
okay, let's unpack this and jump right into the data. We have to start there because without quantifiable proof, age bias can just be dismissed as, subjective feelings. But you mentioned a large study that gives us robust evidence.
I did. The study we're referencing is based on a large factorial survey.
A factorial survey. Okay, can you break that down for us? What does that mean in practice?
Yeah, of course. For our listeners, it's basically a research gold standard. It presents managers with randomized fictional CVs or candidate profiles. These profiles are identical in every single way except for the one variable being tested.
Which in this case is age.
Precisely. This process lets researchers isolate the age penalty from all the other factors like education or, years of experience.
So it's a very clean way to measure bias.
The cleanest. And this study was huge. It surveyed nearly 500 managers, 482 to be exact, across 9 major European countries, which makes the results extremely powerful.
And what did the scores tell us? I'm almost afraid to ask.
They told us the bias is systemic, and it is significant. Older job candidates consistently receive substantially lower hireability scores compared to younger candidates.
Even when they were equally qualified.
Even when their qualifications, their education, their years of experience, their skill set were explicitly identical on paper.
That's just fascinating. So was this penalty applied evenly across the age spectrum, or did the bias, suddenly kick in at a certain age?
That's where the nuance is, and it's really telling. The age penalty is modeled largely as a linear decline. So the older you are, the lower the score, generally speaking.
Okay, a slow slide downwards.
But, and this is the key part, the researchers noted these sharp, almost cliff-like differences in scores that were particularly alarming.
Where did those cliffs appear?
Specifically, they saw the most significant drops occurring between candidates aged 51 and 55, and then another big drop between 55 and 59.
So once you hit your early 50s, you are suddenly viewed as moving into a high-risk category for managers.
That's exactly what the data suggests. For instance, the average 43-year-old candidate scored over 6 out of 10 on the hireability scale.
Okay.
But the average 63-year-old, they scored only 4.31.
Wow. That difference isn't marginal. That's a massive, statistically proven devaluation purely based on a date of birth.
It is. It's huge.
I really want to spend some time dissecting why this happens, because this is where economic theory seems to just clash with reality. Managers often try to rationalize this age bias with the concept of statistical discrimination. It sounds cold, but logical. Can you outline that theory for us?
Absolutely. So statistical discrimination, the theory posits that employers are rational actors. They want to hire the most productive person, but they're always operating with incomplete information.
You never know for sure how someone will perform.
Exactly. So since they can't perfectly predict future productivity, they use proxies like age to make statistical assumptions about risk.
So they're playing the odds based on stereotypes.
Right. The stereotype might be older workers, on average, might take more sick days, or on average, might be less adaptable to new tech. So the employer uses age as a shortcut to assume a higher risk of lower productivity, even if that specific candidate completely defines the stereotype.
Okay, so it's a cold, calculated risk assessment based on perceived group statistics. But then there's the second theory, which is much more uncomfortable. Taste-based discrimination.
Yeah, and taste-based discrimination or animus-based discrimination is fundamentally different. And frankly, it's far more troubling for economic efficiency. This is a general, non-rational dislike or a profound unwillingness to work with older people.
So it's not about logic or statistics, it's just prejudice.
It could stem from generational tension, a desire for a homogeneous workforce, or just a simple lack of comfort. And crucially, the manager making a taste-based decision is willing to pass up a demonstrably highly productive older worker just to satisfy their internal preference for a younger colleague.
They're willing to accept an economically suboptimal outcome. They'd rather have a less qualified younger person than a more qualified older person.
That is the implication. They'll pay a price for their prejudice.
This is the million-dollar question, then. Which one is driving those low hireability scores? Because if it's purely statistical, then providing more evidence like, say, health data or recent high-level training, that should eliminate the bias, right?
That's precisely what the researchers tested, and the results are, I would argue, the most profound finding of the whole study. The researchers hypothesized what they called the surprise signal.
The surprise signal.
Yes. The idea was that if the discrimination was merely statistical, then providing stereotype projecting information, say, noting that an older applicant was exceptionally healthy or had completed intensive recent IT training, that should signal to the rational employer that their proxy assumption about age is wrong.
It should neutralize the stereotype.
That signal should, in theory, significantly reduce the age penalty.
It should, right. Because if I learned that the 58-year-old software engineer just earned a certification in the latest AI architecture, I should stop using the age proxy and focus on that new high-quality information.
That logical assumption, the surprise signal hypothesis, was rejected.
Rejected.
Completely. Age remained a central selection criterion regardless of the positive information provided. The availability of stereotype rejecting or even stereotype confirming information was shockingly equally unimportant to the final hireability score.
Wow. Okay, let me make sure I have this right, because this shifts the entire conversation. You're saying a manager might look at a CV for a 60-year-old engineer who is clearly overqualified, with excellent health records, recent relevant training, and still dock their score significantly simply because they're 60.
That is the very strong implication. This finding points directly to the pervasive presence of taste-based discrimination in European hiring practices.
It's not about the data then.
It implies that age itself is inherently viewed as a negative factor in the decision, separate from the candidate's actual demonstrable human capital traits. The valuation of the applicant's skills and their age were, it seems, largely independent in the decision-making process. The skill might be great, but the age negates it in the manager's mind.
This moves the solution challenge to a whole new level. It means HR departments can't just fix this by rewriting resumes to highlight health and training. We are fighting a cultural or maybe a psychological resistance, not just imperfect information.
That's a really good way to put it.
I have to wonder how much of this is driven by, say, generational anxiety. Is the younger hiring manager subconsciously wary of hiring someone who might instantly outrank them in institutional knowledge or, challenge their digital authority?
That is a critical avenue for speculation. If it's taste-based, it's about comfort and control, and what sociologists might call perceived social distance. If a 35-year-old manager hires a 60-year-old expert, that expert carries 3 decades of institutional practical knowledge that the manager simply does not possess.
It flips the traditional hierarchy on its head.
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
The traditional hierarchy, where youth is often correlated with speed, digital fluency, and proximity to organizational power. Passing up that expert might be an economically inefficient decision for the company, but it's a psychologically comfortable one for the hiring manager.
That's a fascinating and very human layer of complexity. Now, was this systemic bias consistent across all 9 of the countries they surveyed?
No, and this is where it gets interesting. It varied quite a bit, which, it offers some hope that this isn't some fixed human trait, but maybe a cultural or regulatory one.
Okay, so where was it worst?
The level of age discrimination was roughly twice as high in countries like Hungary and Bulgaria compared to the least discriminatory areas.
And who were the leaders?
Sweden and the UK showed the lowest levels of age bias.
So cultural and institutional differences absolutely matter. It's not inevitable.
They do. And this variation wasn't just geographical, it was also sectoral. Discrimination was more pronounced in the more traditional, physically oriented sectors.
Like what?
Like transport and manufacturing. The very places where you might argue the value of long-term embodied experience is highest.
That just reinforces the paradox. The industries most in need of stable, tacit knowledge are the most prone to the age penalty.
It's a real head-scratcher.
Which brings us back powerfully to that engineer who saved the production line. His ability, that instinct, that essential knowledge we've established the data shows we are systematically rejecting it. Let's now define what that lost knowledge actually is, because it's not just a skill, it's a distinct type of knowledge called tacit knowledge.
Yes, and this is the bridge between the economic data and the operational risk for these companies. Tacit knowledge is fundamentally the know-how.
Know-how.
It's the knowledge gained through years and years of practical experience through doing that has been internalized to the point where it becomes unconscious. It is incredibly difficult to articulate, to codify, or to formalize.
So you can't just write it down in a training manual?
Not really. The philosopher Michael Polanyi, who defined this concept back in 1966, he famously summed it up with the slogan, "We can know more than we can tell."
I love that quote. We can know more than we can tell. It perfectly describes that moment when the engineer knew exactly what to do without referring to a manual or a diagnostic screen. It's judgment, practical intuition, knowing how the machine should sound and should feel.
That's right. And it contrasts so sharply with explicit knowledge, which is what the younger team was relying on. The manual, the data sheet, the codified error code. Explicit knowledge is easily transmitted. It can be written down, stored in a database, or taught in the classroom.
But tacit knowledge?
Tacit knowledge is transmitted only through prolonged interaction, through apprenticeship, and shared experience. It's a difference between reading a book on how to drive and actually navigating rush hour traffic.
So the opening anecdote perfectly illustrates the danger here. The junior team was drowning in explicit knowledge, all those error codes, but they were paralyzed because they lacked the practical intuition, the tacit knowledge, to interpret that data in a real-world, unexpected situation.
And this leads us directly to a concept known as Polanyi's paradox, which is highly, highly relevant in our age of AI and automation.
Okay, explain that connection.
Well, automation and algorithmic efficiency require fully specific, codifiable descriptions of procedures. AI needs codified, explicit rules to function optimally, whether it's processing loan applications or controlling a machine on an assembly line.
It needs the instruction manual.
It needs the perfect instruction manual. But Polanyi's paradox states that because human tacit knowledge often exceeds our explicit understanding, because we know more than we can tell, that very human intuition presents a major and enduring obstacle to full automation.
It creates a fundamental discrepancy.
A huge one. Machines excel at processing vast amounts of explicit data, but they struggle profoundly to apply human judgment, flexibility, common sense, and practical intuition in novel situations.
Like a self-driving car trying to navigate an unexpected road closure with a police officer directing traffic.
That's a perfect example. We often forget that what is easy for a human like recognizing a specific face in a crowd, or reading subtle body language, or deciding whether a noise in an engine is a fatal flaw or just a routine rattle, is often impossible to translate into a tidy algorithm.
So we are essentially rejecting the very people who hold the keys to the knowledge that AI cannot yet master, and at the same time, we're betting the entire economy on the technology that fundamentally depends on that knowledge being explicitly codifiable.
It is a truly dangerous position for an advanced economy like Germany to be in.
And the societal risk must compound when we consider how the perception of competence itself is changing.
Absolutely. As the reliance on AI, algorithmic decisions, and this sort of rapid digital knowledge, think of short instructional videos, automated text suggestions, clickbait summaries, as that grows, we risk fundamentally underestimating the value of long-term, genuine experience.
The source material mentions that the perceived image of competence is shifting away from ability towards click counts. That's a powerful and pretty scary observation.
It is. The manager who can generate the fastest report or the team that can cite the most recent viral solution is rewarded, regardless of whether that solution has been tested in practice for 30 years.
So when knowledge gained through doing, through difficult decisions made under pressure, and orientation guided by real role models, when all that is replaced by what the source calls digital substitute authorities, we create a culture where theory ranks before practice.
And that severs the vital chain of knowledge transfer. It becomes a vicious cycle. We fire the experienced people who hold the tacit knowledge, and then the younger generation, who are relying on explicit digital knowledge, loses the opportunity to internalize the practical intuition they need for complex problem solving.
This loss also maps onto the broader economic trend of occupational polarization, doesn't it? It's not just about what skills we value, but which jobs are growing versus which are disappearing.
Precisely. The substitution of routine, codifiable knowledge, those middle-income jobs involving repetitive production or administrative work, that substitution is extensive because those tasks are easy for machines to perform.
Which leads to the polarization.
Right. We see growth at the high end in abstract tasks requiring creativity, complex problem-solving, persuasion. And paradoxically, we also see growth at the low end in manual tasks that require physical adaptability, subtle perception, and dexterity.
And this is where we bring back Moravec's paradox. The idea that the hard stuff is easy for computers, but the easy stuff for humans is hard for computers.
Yes. Moravec's paradox observes that low-level physical and cognitive skills, like grasping an irregularly shaped object or navigating a cluttered room, or even just recognizing an unexpected deviation on a production line, are skills that evolution took billions of years to perfect in us.
And they're incredibly difficult for computers to master.
Incredibly. The machine struggles with the physical or perceptive realm. A financial analyst processing structured data is highly susceptible to automation. But the shift supervisor, who can hear that specific unusual hum in the machine and intervene with a single valve turn, that job is currently safe because the knowledge is tacit and embodied.
Yet we are actively rejecting the very people who hold those irreplaceable skills.
Yeah, it makes no economic sense.
The economic and theoretical arguments make such a compelling case for keeping experienced workers. But when we look at Germany specifically, the context of the demographic crisis elevates this from just an economic problem to an existential national challenge. The text refers to this as the moving glacier.
That analogy is so accurate because it suggests this immense, unavoidable structural pressure that moves slowly, but irrevocably. Germany's demographic fitness indicators show just immense challenges ahead. The forecasts are incredibly stark.
How stark are we talking?
By 2060, Germany's total population is predicted to shrink by nearly 19%.
That is nearly 1/5 of the entire country gone. But the labor market numbers, I understand, are even more terrifying.
They are. The working age population, the people actually supporting the rest of the economy, is projected to fall by up to 35% in that same time frame.
35%? That's catastrophic.
And the effects aren't far off in the future. They're happening right now. Over the next 15 years alone, Germany is predicted to lose 5 million workers. That's a 12.5% decline in the labor force that simply cannot be replaced by current immigration trends alone.
So the people in their 50s and 60s right now, the ones being filtered out by their birth year, they aren't a replaceable cost factor. They are the majority of the available human capital for the next 2 decades.
Absolutely. By the end of this current decade, workers over the age of 50 will constitute 40% of the entire German labor force. The experienced generation is the labor force of the immediate future.
To treat them as an expiration date while facing this severe skilled worker shortage is, well, it's a profound failure of policy and corporate strategy.
It's organizational self-sabotage is what it is.
So given this urgency, how is Germany performing compared to its international peers in adapting to this reality? Are they catching up?
The general assessment is that Germany is categorized as having a turnaround underway. They're in the same boat as countries like France. They started late, but they have implemented some serious, far-reaching changes to cope.
Like what, for example?
Well, for example, gradually raising the age of eligibility for full pension benefits. So they're taking steps.
Okay, so they recognize the problem, but they were behind the curve. Who are the well-positioned nations that Germany should be looking to as a model?
The analysis places countries like the UK, the US, and Canada in that well-positioned category. These nations either faced fewer demographic pressures to begin with, or they implemented more supportive and flexible labor market policies much, much earlier. Germany just had more entrenched structural rigidities that made adaptation slower.
Are there any positive trends we can pull from the German experience? Something showing that the system can adapt when it's motivated?
There are, definitely. There are clear positive results demonstrating individual willingness to stay in the workforce. The employment population ratio for people aged 55 to 64 has increased substantially in Germany.
By how much?
It rose from just 38% in 1995 to 61% by 2009, and it's continued to climb. The employment rate of older workers is actually growing faster than total employment.
That is encouraging.
And we also see a particularly strong trend among older women, where their age-specific activity rates, meaning how many older women are participating in the workforce, are strongly increasing, especially in their later career stages.
So people are willing to work longer, and the economy is absorbing them, even if the HR filtering system is fighting against that trend.
That's the stark contrast, isn't it? It suggests that the political will and corporate strategy in Germany still lag way behind the demographic and economic necessity.
And the mindset is the issue.
It is. The current policy and the corporate application logic view experience as ballast, a cost that needs to be shed. But if we look internationally, we see other societies treating this experienced cohort entirely differently, as a stability anchor.
A stability anchor, I like that.
They recognize that accumulated long-term experience is the foundation of business stability, especially during a period of demographic upheaval.
Let's analyze these stability anchors then, starting with some of the most dramatic policy mandates. What has Japan done? They're often cited as the demographic canary in the coal mine.
Japan has implemented profound cultural and governmental shifts to accommodate its aging population. The government actively promotes employment up to the age of 70.
And does that translate to corporate action?
Directly. Approximately 40% of Japanese firms employ people over 70. This isn't just about societal necessity. It's driven by a deep cultural recognition of the value of the sensei, the master craftsman or teacher, whose experience is viewed as invaluable institutional memory.
That completely reverses the corporate concept of an expiration date. It normalizes having, octogenarians in the workforce. Now, Singapore is often held up as a model for policy mandates. How far have they gone?
Singapore has taken a very direct legal approach. They prohibit forcing employees into retirement before age 63. And more significantly, they mandate that employers must offer reemployment contracts until the age of 68.
A mandate. That's a crucial policy lever. But wouldn't legislating retention like that lead to companies just holding on to workers who are genuinely unproductive simply to avoid a legal penalty? That sounds like it could breed corporate resentment and inefficiency.
That's a valid, critical question, and it's one they thought about. The mechanism in Singapore is structured to mitigate that risk. While the employer must offer reemployment, the contract terms, so the duties, the salary, the hours, can be adjusted based on the individual's ability and the company's needs.
As long as it's a fair negotiation.
As long as it adheres to fair negotiation guidelines. The aim isn't to force an employer to keep a full-time, high-stress position for an 80-year-old who can no longer perform it. The aim is to guarantee that the knowledge and experience remain accessible to the firm.
Often through things like part-time work or mentorship roles.
Exactly, or specialized consulting. It just ensures that the door doesn't automatically slam shut based on age alone.
So it formalizes flexibility and retention rather than mandating a rigid employment structure. What about the Nordic countries and the Netherlands? They consistently lead European employment figures for this cohort.
They really do. They lead Europe in employment rates for the 55-64 age group, with Iceland, Sweden, and the Netherlands consistently exceeding 75%.
Wow, 75%.
And the difference there is less about a legal mandate and more about the labor market culture, flexibility, and comprehensive health management. These societies have created labor markets where the expectation is that people can and want to work longer.
And they're supported in doing so.
They're supported by flexible options and ongoing career development, meaning age is just not an immediate disqualifier. They have fundamentally integrated the concept of lifelong employability into their culture.
This all suggests that the solutions are absolutely known and have been proven successful in various cultural contexts. The challenge now shifts entirely to corporate strategy. How can German companies move from this ballast mindset to actively retaining and utilizing their experienced talent?
Well, the first non-negotiable step is a massive ideological shift in human resources management. They have to abandon the deficit model and wholeheartedly embrace the competence model.
Let's break down the psychology of those two approaches. What's the deficit model?
The deficit model is reductive and really pessimistic. It views aging as a continuous, irreversible process of dequalification, a steady erosion of skills, speed, and capability.
It sees the older worker as a ticking liability.
Exactly, and it justifies filtering them out. The competence model, on the other hand, is additive and optimistic. It views aging as a gain in crucial areas: accumulated experience, expansive professional networks, superior judgment, and complex problem-solving ability. It views the older worker as an asset whose value actually appreciates over time.
So a manager operating under the deficit model sees the engineer who saved the production line and thinks he's too old to learn new software. But a manager operating under the competence model sees that engineer and thinks he has the intuition we need to stabilize the entire line, and we must capture that knowledge before he leaves.
That's the entire shift in a nutshell. And once that philosophical shift is made, companies can apply the practical framework known as the triple R for managing an aging workforce.
Triple
Recruiting, retention, and retirement. This includes all the common sense age management measures, flexible working time, comprehensive health management, formal knowledge transfer programs, ensuring all working teams are age diversified.
Let's focus intently on retention, because keeping the existing talent seems like the fastest way to stabilize the workforce. We have a highly granular German study on the effectiveness of training as a retention tool, which showed some really unexpected findings.
This study is so critical because it moves past general assumptions about training. It sought to evaluate which HR practices actually prevent older workers from retiring early, and it distinguished between two types.
Which were?
Standard training, which is the general training offered to everyone in the establishment, and targeted training, which is specifically designed for older employees, often to address specific skill gaps, health needs, or digital literacy.
Okay, so if a company offers a general course on corporate ethics, that's standard training. If they offer a specialized course on updating obsolete CAD software for their 55-plus engineer cohort, that's targeted training.
You've got it.
So did training work overall to keep people in the workforce longer?
Well, the overall effect was highly nuanced. It was really dependent on two factors: gender and wage distribution.
Okay.
The study found no statistically significant overall link between any training standard or targeted and the retention of older men.
None at all for men. What about for women?
For older women, targeted training did show an overall retention effect. It reduced the likelihood of retirement by about 1.6 percentage points.
That's a measurable effect, but why only for women and why only targeted training? That's so specific.
This led the researchers to look deeper into the salary structure, which revealed the most important finding of all. Training's effectiveness varied drastically based on the worker's position in the establishment's wage distribution.
So where you are on the company pay scale.
Right. It matters most for the lowest earners. Let me just pause and simplify that term for the listener. The establishment wage quintile is just the firm's payroll divided into 5 equal groups. The lowest quintile is the bottom 20% of earners at that specific company.
The lowest paid people in that factory or office.
Yeah, exactly. And the study revealed that HR interventions designed to retain older workers are most effective when applied to those with the lowest relative wages.
Okay, so let's start with low-wage women. What was the impact of targeted training on them?
The impact was massive. Low-wage women, those in the lowest quintile, showed a significantly lower retirement likelihood, up to 3.29 percentage points lower when they were offered targeted training.
And what about standard training for them?
Critically, standard training showed zero retention effect for this group. Nothing.
A 3.3 percentage point reduction from a single policy intervention is huge in retention terms. Why is the effect so strong, and why did standard training fail them?
This strongly aligns with human capital theory, particularly related to career interruptions. Many women in that generation may have experienced career breaks for childcare or elder care, which often results in skill depreciation or a gap in their explicit knowledge base relative to their male peers.
So standard training, which assumes everyone has the same baseline competence, just bypasses the specific skills they need to catch up.
But targeted training fills that specific historical gap.
And the data backs this up.
It does. The study showed that targeted training was associated with higher wage growth across subsequent survey years and an increased probability of moving up the establishment wage distribution.
So it's a clear, efficient mechanism. The targeted training fills the skill gaps, which makes them more productive and more valuable to the firm.
The firm responds with higher relative wages, and the women, feeling their value is now recognized and appreciated, are incentivized to postpone retirement.
The company gets more value, the employee gets more pay and stays longer. That's a win-win driven entirely by smart, specific HR policy. Now, what about low-wage men? Were they retained by the same mechanism?
Interestingly, no. The results for men were the inverse regarding the type of training. Men in the lowest establishment wage quintile showed a significantly lower retirement likelihood, about 2 percentage points lower when offered standard training.
And targeted training for them.
It was much less effective for this group.
So general training works for low-wage men, but specific targeted training works for low-wage women. That's a really counterintuitive distinction.
It suggests the mechanisms at play are different. For low-wage men, while standard training was linked to higher wage growth, it did not show that same upward mobility in the establishment wage distribution that the women experienced.
What does that mean?
It suggests the wage increase might be due to broader organizational payroll policies. Maybe the entire factory was simply getting raises, rather than the training uniquely boosting the older men's productivity relative to their peers within the firm. The study leaves the precise mechanism for men's retention a bit inconclusive compared to the very strong human capital finding for women.
But what we can take away from this is that training is a powerful retention tool, but it needs to be precisely tailored to the specific cohort and the historical career trajectory of that demographic.
Absolutely. Throwing money at generic, one-size-fits-all training programs is wasteful. Intelligent, targeted application is everything. And we see companies that have institutionalized this tailored, lifelong approach, achieving real organizational resilience.
Let's look at 2 prime examples of these successful intergenerational concepts. Start with DecaBank. What was their strategy for managing age diversity?
DecaBank implemented what they call a life cycle-oriented HR policy. This means they treat an employee's entire professional journey, from their initial education straight through to their final retirement, as a dynamic path, not a rigid 40-year track.
So they're building corporate loyalty and retention by acknowledging that real life is not a straight line.
Precisely. The policy supports staff through career breaks for child or elder care. It offers comprehensive health and ergonomic management tailored to specific life stages, and it provides very flexible retirement options.
And what was the outcome for them?
They actually won an HR management award for this program. They benefited from significantly low staff turnover and maintained high productivity because they built a reputation as an attractive, flexible employer that values long-term commitment. They mastered the R's of recruiting and retention simultaneously.
And what about an industrial example like ABB, a major player in power and automation? What was their core focus?
ABB's concept was called generations learning from one another, growing together. Their focus was heavily on structured knowledge transfer, addressing that tacit knowledge gap we talked about at the beginning.
How did they actually formalize that knowledge transfer?
They implemented mandatory age-mixed working teams and competence training tailored specifically to different life phases. They also set up formal mentoring systems and knowledge-sharing platforms to ensure that the uncodifiable, hands-on experience of the older cohort was actively passed down to the younger generation before people retired.
So they didn't wait for the knowledge to walk out the door.
They didn't. And they also focused heavily on flexible, sliding out of the career life options, using part-time work and teleworking arrangements to make the transition to retirement smoother, which in turn extended the availability of their expertise to the company.
These examples, DecaBank and ABB, they just show that corporate restructuring for age diversity leads directly to stabilizing quality, securing expertise, and enhancing organizational resilience. It's not just about doing good, it's about good business.
That is the essential takeaway. The overall synthesis of this deep dive is that the paradox we started with is entirely self-inflicted and, at the end of the day, economically inefficient. Germany is hemorrhaging experienced talent, the Thomas-level engineers, and creating organizational fragility by allowing that uncodifiable know-how, the very knowledge that Polanyi's paradox identifies as critical, to be lost to taste-based discrimination.
And the most frustrating reality is that the solutions are proven and they're demonstrated internationally. From the explicit reemployment mandates guaranteeing retention in Singapore to the cultural embedding of experience as a stabilizing anchor in places like Japan and the flexible labor markets of the Nordic countries.
The key policy and corporate takeaway is that age diversity must be moved immediately from a marginal topic or a compliance footnote to a prioritized structural necessity. The German application logic, which still filters based on the birth year, fundamentally excludes the most reliable and knowledgeable workers, precisely when the demographic reality demands their retention and utilization.
Employing older applicants is not about corporate grace or charity. It is about stabilizing companies, securing product quality, bridging the specific knowledge gaps that AI and digital systems cannot solve, and ensuring the intellectual, practical, and cultural future of the country. If the most advanced economies in Europe refuse to utilize the essential human resources they already have, they cannot possibly secure the future workforce they need.